one ran a little late, and we'll welcome them, even though class did start at 7:30. So, glad you're all here. I am Lee Kingman, and I'm pleased to represent the Blake Alumni Board, which sponsors these events known as Breakfast at Blake. We've got a good lineup for the rest of the year. Our February speaker, as some of you may have heard, has been dispatched to Sochi. So we were scrambling. Still am. And I was just informed this morning by Becky Angley that Nina Hale, class of 85, will speak. I don't know her topic, but show up anyway and we'll hear about it. I apologize, but it literally last minute, and we appreciate the fact that she's going to fill in. In April, author Richard Preston will speak as part of the Otis Environmental Program, and in May we'll hear from Mark Mortensen, whose company, as you know, is building a Baylor football stadium over in Minneapolis. Well, today we have the honor of hearing from Fritz, Corrigan, class of 1960. Fritz had a distinguished business career, and his accomplishments are documented in dozens of business journals, and also in the 1960 Blake column. So I just want to point out a few things that Frederick Wolf Corrigan, also known as Fritz or Bud in the state, earned varsity letters in football, hockey, and track. He sang in the Glee Club, he acted in the school plays, and he was the editor of the column. But, and I am reading here, he didn't always have fun. If you tried to find Fritz Corrigan in the senior room during his free time, you would search in vain. You probably would find him either in the library or at the senior table studying. In both cases, you would find him studying hard, but always tackles his duties with a smile. His smile and friendly attitude have helped him make many friends here at Blake, and obviously those friendships continue. It also says here that during the summer, Fritz can be seen most of the time in his sailboat named The Wrong Way, sailing on Lake Harriet, usually with a member of the opposite sex as his crew. Well, obviously, Fritz learned how to do things the right way, and here to present his talk, which he calls 40 Years at Corrigan and Mosiac, We Did Too Build It, is Blake's own Fritz Corrigan.
Thank you, Woody.
Yeah,
Thanks very much.
Yeah, good. And you took back
That was highly inflated. None of it's true. I was a lousy student here, but got through. And I remember, I thought about this opportunity this morning and remembered back to the first time, senior speech, they call it now. We had to do it as juniors. I was standing over here, naked, no podium, not quite naked, but scared to death. My knees were going like this. I've memorized a short story from the Reader's Digest of those days, got through it and sat down as fast as I could. Now I kind of worry that I might not be politically correct in my remarks here today. Another different kind of worry, I guess. So I hope I don't offend anybody in the next few minutes, but I do hope to challenge some of you, all of you perhaps, on some of the things I've learned in the 54 years, good heavens, 54 years since graduating from Blake. Back in the late 50s, we sang 2 hymns in this room, and we had a professor, as a member of the faculty, speak to us about some character building experience. I'll never forget John Burton talking about his experience in the 52 Olympics, cross-country skier. The message, which he learned the hard way, was when a Norwegian competitor blew past him at the top of a hill, a long climb, was that when the going gets really tough, and you think you have reached the top, turn on the afterburners, because someone else is going to do the same thing and blow right by you if you don't. I wonder if Blake still has those morning chapel sessions. If they don't, I think Blake should. One point of view. A brief chronology. This is where my family told me to cut it down a lot. And I see a lot of family members here, and so I'll be very brief. But I did 4 years at Dartmouth. I played a little hockey, skied. I was an economics major, was in Army ROTC. I made some lifelong friends. Immediately after Dartmouth, I went into the Army, infantry school at Fort Benning before training as an intelligence officer, and I served 13 months in Korea. and another 6 months at Fort Lewis, Washington before finishing my 2-year commitment. In the Army, I learned to try to think in the other guy's shoes, particularly North Korea, Communist China, Soviet Far East in 1965 when we couldn't go to those places. And I learned how to write briefly as opposed to 5,000 word term papers. Generals wanted it brief. I traveled to Japan and the Philippines and Hong Kong and developed an interest in things global. When I came back from the Army 2 weeks later, I joined Cargill as a trader in the soybean processing business, and over the next 38 years, I worked in corn milling, coal mining, flour milling, fertilizer, hybrid seeds, salt mining, Cargill's farmer-facing grain origination business. I got to read this because I can't remember it all. And Cargill's biotech-focused startup businesses such as vitamin E, biodegradable plastic, zero-trans fat, canola oil, etc., which sounds like I had a hard time holding a job within Cargill. I retired from Cargill as Executive Vice President in 2004 for the purpose of founding the Mosiac company as its president and CEO. And I digress for a second to talk about the far better half of my life. I met Glenda right over here in Cedar Rapids, Iowa on Memorial Day of 1969 at the swimming pool at our apartment complex. She was wearing a white bikini, reading a book on golf for women, and I fell in love instantly. We met on Memorial Day and got married that Thanksgiving. It was love at first sight, and almost 45 years later, we're still together. She was a high school teacher and continued her career until children came along and we began to move. She's been my far better half in every sense of the word. She raised our 3 kids to be responsible adults and good parents while I was traveling for Cargill. She taught them great values and lessons in life, and she taught, and today our 3 children are happily married to really good spouses, and between them we have 7 grandchildren, 3 of whom live here and in Edina and go to Blake. Our daughter Molly's right there, and our oldest granddaughter is Claire, and she's right next to him. Claire? She's cutting class right now. Her class doesn't start for a few more minutes, I guess. We moved 9 times in the first 18 years at Cargill in pursuit of growth opportunities. It was easier for me to move as I already had Cargill friends in the new locations. But for Glenda, she had to meet new friends, select good schools for the kids, find new doctors, grocery stores, and so forth, and then be ready to do it all over again 2 years later. She was, as my mom put it, a saint. She still is. She never complained. Once we got back to Minneapolis in 1983, we started traveling. We traveled a lot, like all over the world, really strange places at times, but we had a whole lot of fun for a couple of Midwestern kids who didn't think we'd travel at all when we got married. Cargill bought a bankrupt phosphate fertilizer producer off the courthouse steps in Tampa, Florida at the tail end of 1985. And shortly after, I was asked to manage it, and did so more or less for the rest of my career. You can interpret more or less any way you want. I was off again, on again a little bit, and maybe I didn't do it very well at times. Between 86 and 99, we grew the fertilizer business with production and distribution businesses around the world, literally all over the world. It was a true global team effort. Lots of hard work by a very diverse team. And we had lots of fun and developed an awful lot of pride in ourselves because we were succeeding in a very competitive environment, creating thousands of jobs and serving farmers by helping them improve their crop yields. That's the market for fertilizer, you know. Ultimately, that work helped those farmers compete at lower market prices, enabling them to sell their corn or soybeans or whatever crop they were growing at even lower prices while making a profit. Their customers, in turn, could sell their food products at lower costs, benefiting consumers everywhere in the world. Agronomic studies have demonstrated that proper fertilizer use improves yields by about 40%, almost regardless of the crop. Imagine if we didn't use this natural fertilizer, stuff that is here on Earth, it's natural stuff. Phosphate is fish bones that are millions of years old. Nitrogen comes from the air that we breathe. 80% of the air we breathe is nitrogen. Imagine if we didn't use those fertilizers. The population of the planet might be 5 billion people rather than the 7 that we have here today, because we couldn't feed that extra 2 billion that arrived here since we graduated from Blake. And food costs are low. People, especially poor people in developing countries, have more disposable income to spend on other things in life because food costs are low, and their standards of living improve as we drive food costs down. Shift to the environment for a second. We experienced some serious environmental mishaps in the early years of producing phosphate fertilizer in Florida. Our name was mud or worse for about 5 years. The company that we bought out of bankruptcy had a really terrible reputation, and I think we added to it in our first couple of years. Those were not fun events, but we did turn our reputation around by managing our plants correctly in the first place, doing the right things right, and spending the capital necessary, and I'm talking millions of dollars, and to fix those plants, and earning the opportunity to continue in business by working hard to add value to the Tampa and Central Florida communities by our presence there. Giving back today is a centerpiece of the culture at Cargill and Mosiac. It took us about 5 years to work out a deal with IMC Global to merge Cargill's fertilizer business with them to create the Mosiac Company. But we finally got it done in October of 2004. We negotiated off and on, debated key issues, argued over everything from the cost of the merger to each of us, to control, to who would run it. It was really frustrating at times, but we persevered and created a stronger, better financed, and more competitive company with a much broader product line that could serve many more customers around the world. This was the first and still only Cargill business ever taken public in Cargill's 150 years, almost 150 years. Ringing the bell at the New York Stock Exchange was quite exciting for me personally, and for all of Cargill. It was a big high five for everybody involved. We had the whole team that put the deal together up on that balcony. It was exciting. It's one of the 2 largest producers of phosphate and potash fertilizers in the world. We produce about 17 to 20 million tons each year today, and we're still growing. Mosiac mines about 1,000 acres per year in Central Florida. We disturb the surface when we mine, but we put it back better than when we found it in every case. We've learned how to build wetlands that are better in the eyes of the environmental experts than what we started with. We do it happily, not grudgingly, not because the EPA is looking over our shoulder, but because we know it's the way we earn respect from our neighbors. Now, last January, and this is especially fun for a golfer, Mosiac opened 2 18-hole golf courses on its reclaimed land, actually not so reclaimed land in Central Florida. Turned them into stream song. You may have read about them in Golf Digest or Golf Magazine or any other golf publications, because they've been well publicized. And they are, by consensus, the 2 best new courses opened in 2012, and they rank in the top 60 courses in the United States. So this is really taking a post-mining mess and turning it into a neat landscape that employs over 250 people, provides a lot of fun for golfers, and lots of revenue to one of the poorest counties in Florida. Now, when I started at Cargill, the total work, that was back in 1966, a long time ago, the global workforce numbered about 5,000 people. Today, Cargill employs about 142,000 people in 67 countries around the world. And the bankrupt fertilizer company we bought in 1985 employed 2,000 people then, and it's now on its way to about 10,500 with an acquisition it's working on right now. Since retiring, I've been busy in a number of business activities, a lot of volunteer work and charitable activities, chasing these grandkids of ours, traveling, playing golf, skiing, and the like. And I shortened the speech a lot just then. So I'll get down to business now with that background. Did my classical Blake education help me in my career? You bet. I thank my parents almost every week for letting me go to Blake. And then thanks to Blake, I got into Dartmouth. Doors opened up for me. At Blake, we started to learn traditional values of hard work and teamwork, responsibility, integrity, honesty, trust, and more. Now here's a controversial thought. Maybe it's not so controversial. Our president, that is President Obama, I don't think has yet learned the values of integrity and telling the truth and earning trust. Maybe that's just part of the job of being a politician. But by contrast, at Cargill, I don't remember a leader ever telling a lie in 40 years. Second thing I started to learn at Blake was to write effectively. Bill Glenn and Prescott Cleveland's book on proper sentence structure, you remember that, Ramey? You bet. Helped me figure out how to write a sentence, one sentence, you know. Dick Van Sanford's Latin classes, I really paid attention there because he was a hockey coach back then. Got me off to a good start with vocabulary. And Harold Hodgkinson taught me to do my homework very, very thoroughly. And what I learned in his chemistry and physics classes, the only formal science classes I had in my education, served me pretty well in leading several complex processing businesses. The chemistry we learned right here at Blake School I applied every single day in the phosphate fertilizer business, every day. So it was practical too. I got frustrated a little bit today with the environmental ideologues who hold strong views but don't base those views on thoroughly studied sound science. We could talk about global warming, or take the whole morning doing that, or the Keystone Pipeline, or mining permits, for example. Take an example in Florida. We worked on a mining permit to extend a mine that was already operating for 10 years, 100,000 pages of data, 30 public hearings, et cetera. You know, 7 permits, we got them all. And then the Sierra Club sued us. Didn't do any homework at all, they just sued us and stopped our mining for a year and a half. Now, Jack Eady taught us about American history. He made it come alive and taught us to think about the reasons why things happened the way they did. Always, what's the cause? What was the effect? Why did it happen? And he sparked an interest in the world outside Minnesota and the United States. I fear that Senator Al Franken must have been asleep in that class that Jack taught about the wisdom of the Senate filibuster rules and how they protect the minority from a dominant bullying majority when he and Harry Reid voted to the nuclear option here just recently. Couldn't resist that chance. What did I learn in my career? A lot of things, I think, and I'm still learning, I hope. One thing is that competition in the global marketplace is a brutal, stern taskmaster that provides amazingly wonderful results for mankind. At Cargill and Mosiac, we competed intensely to become the global leader in nourishing people and crops. To succeed, we had to be the best, lowest cost producer of every product and service that we offered, and had to earn our customers' business by offering value unmatched by our competitors. Another thing that I learned was about risk. And the message here is, don't avoid it, embrace it. Whether it's commodity price risk or counterparty risk, where the person you're doing business might walk on a transaction. Currency risk, we lost $250 million at Cargill in 1999 when Russia defaulted on its sovereign debt. Then there's plant operating risks or industrial safety risks. And if you're operating plants all over the world, you better be really good serving your people and keeping them safe. And the environmental risks that we already talked about. We recognized those risks, we learned how to manage them, and committed to being the best citizens we could possibly be. Another thing we learned is that teamwork wins. There are no prima donnas, no rock stars at Cargill and Mosiac. The team wins, particularly global team wins, are really, really fun. Another thing that we've learned, this is an opinion, nobody owes us anything. Entitlements is sort of a new word born in the 1930s during the Depression on FDR's watch, when he drafted his second Bill of Rights. Excuse me a second. I think Thomas Jefferson got it right when he wrote the Declaration of Independence and said that the only inalienable rights that we have are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Note, not the right to happiness, but the right to pursue our dreams. No guarantees of success, but the right to try to succeed or perhaps fail without government participation or obstruction or regulation. I think we've lost our way on this issue during our lifetimes. We took a lot of risks at Cargill, pursued what seemed to be good business opportunities with some successes and some failures. We exercised our right to pursue our dreams, but never had a guarantee of success going in. Another thing that we learned at those companies was that we could do well by doing good. Cargill's vision for itself is to be the global leader in nourishing people, and no surprise, Mosiac's vision for itself when we got launched was to be the global leader in nourishing crops. Both companies had 4 measures of progress toward those goals. 1, engaged employees. 2, enthusiastic customers. And 3, enriched communities. And lastly, 4th, superior returns to our shareholders. And it was lots of fun to go to Wall Street and tell those young analysts that these were our priorities, in fact, and they're ranked first to last. Shareholders, you're down here. And that those shareholders would do very, very well if we executed on the first 3 every single time. It was a lot of fun to tell them that because they were not looking for that thought. And I would say also that free enterprise really works. That's something that we practiced extensively during those 40 years. According to Arthur Brooks in his book, Road to Freedom, global free enterprise has reduced poverty in the world as measured by the percent of the world population living on less than $1 a day by 80% since 1970. Generally, governments get in the way of that progress, particularly totalitarian or collectivist or communist, socialist kinds of governments. North Korea, Cuba, Venezuela, China under Mao, Russia are great illustrations. I think all of them have failed to raise living standards. And I've seen most of those countries with my own eyes sort of before and after they threw off the yoke of those regimes. The last thing that we learned at Cargill and Mosiac was that leadership is a great differentiator. Leaders achieve results through the enthusiastic work of their teammates. Good leaders recognize that it's the work of their teams that should get the credit, and they give it to them. Leaders have uniformly 3 key fundamental traits. 1 is integrity. They don't lie. They have congruence of thought, word, and deed. They set the tone at the top of the organization, which in turn establishes the culture. I wonder if Chris Christie really set the tone at the top in New Jersey as played out in that George Washington Bridge thing. Second trait is moral courage. Leaders take responsibility for the decisions they make and have the guts to make the right call, even at lots of personal risk. The third characteristic is passion or commitment to the enterprise goal. Their passion is apparent to those around them, and it's infectious. They lead by example because they really believe in what they're trying to get done. And fourth one, it's not a trait as much as what they do, and that is they make great but often difficult decisions. Decisions in which the risks are high, both personally and for the enterprise, and the odds of success are not really clear. Most decisions, I believe at the top, at least in my experience, had lots of gray area in the decision-making process. Nothing seemed to be black and white, and considered good judgment was really important. I had the opportunity to work for some great leaders at Cargill, many of whom have ties to Blake. I think one of them actually has spoken here before, Whitney McMillan. Fred Seed was the president of Cargill when I joined the company. His two sons were both Blake students at the time. Jerry Mitchell, his son went to Blake. Pete McVeigh and Warren Staley, you've probably heard those names, and Greg Page, whose son also attended Blake. Now, as Haji would say occasionally, looking over the top of his glasses, he would say, "There will be a test today." You any remember that? Yeah. I sure do. Well, I'm going to wrap up with a quiz. You didn't think that was going to happen, did you? I'm going to give you a quick list of names, and we're going to try to identify what these people have in common. You can start with Andrew Carnegie, Thomas Jefferson, John D. Rockefeller, Henry Ford, Leland Stanford, James J. Hill, Gordon Moore, Moore's Law, Intel, Hewlett and Packard, Bill Gates, Steve Jobs. I could throw out Harold Hamm, but you probably don't know who he is. He's a fracker up in North Dakota, making a whole bunch of oil for this country and driving the price down. What do these guys have in common? Well, one could say fat cats, rich white guys, robber barons, monopolists. That's what the press generally calls them, you know. Rather than ask you to answer in the interest of time, they all of them invented or improved something or drove the cost of production of something down dramatically, thereby making it affordable for everybody. They developed products and services and industries that rapidly improved our lives, our standards of living, and just plain convenience. Light bulbs, iPhones, you know, and those costs of things, we take them for granted today. And because of that ability to lower the cost, they grew demand dramatically. So they built big businesses, they hired lots and lots of people, they created huge wealth for themselves and their shareholders. No question about that. But what did they do with that wealth? They gave it back in a major way. And we can think of all the things that these people have done. Carnegie built libraries. The Ford and Rockefeller Foundations actually got involved in agriculture when they sponsored Norman Borlaug's work in developing dwarf strains of wheat, which India and Pakistan used to save over 1 billion people from starvation in the early 50s. Borlaug, as you know, a University of Minnesota graduate, earned the Nobel Peace Prize for his work sponsored by those two organizations. They've built universities. Moore, Hewlett, and Packard today offer huge grants to serve and protect the environment. $100 million a year from those three foundations go to environmental activities. And Gates, of course, he and his wife are working on hunger and disease elimination in Africa. And look around you. There are some names on these buildings, or naming conference rooms and theaters and so forth at Blake. Macmillan, Pillsbury, Bovey, right here, Crosby, and others. I'd wager that they were pretty successful people. They didn't get government funding or government advice when they built their businesses, and they helped improve the Minnesota economy, all before they provided the funds that put these roofs over our heads today. They did it with dollars they had left over after they paid their taxes. They did too build it, and generally with no government help. And I would argue that many Cargill and Mosiac could claim a spot on that list in a much smaller but meaningful way. They are truly leading the world in nourishing people and crops, and they did build it. Thanks very much for the time this morning. Any questions?
Very much.
Thank
Please.
you. Yeah.
I'm sure there's some questions from the crowd, so fire away. We'll start over here.
Sure.
Would you be available to come back and repeat this entire presentation so I can bring my two sons?
Anytime.
Indeed, we did actually, Stephen, and it will be on the website.
I want a cake, bring it to my office, see it, my sons to see it, everybody else. Sir, that was fabulous.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
You may remember, Jackie, one of his favorite things to teach was government
Yeah.
regulated capitalism. So what role should government play?
as small a role as it can, get out of the way so the free enterprise system can work. But I think in terms of baseball and football and other sports analogies all the time, every one of those sports has boundaries. Golf, you have out of bounds, and you know the penalty for going out of bounds. Football has out of bounds. They have foul lines in baseball. Make the boundaries wide and let people compete, and then have stiff penalties like 2 minutes, 5-minute major in hockey or whatever. You sit it out for a while, and that includes prison if you're really a bad guy like Madoff. But let the private sector flourish, establish the boundaries very clearly, and penalize the people who break the rules. That's as simple as I can make it. Keep it as small, the common defense, roads, stuff that the government can build, legitimately can build for us better than we can do it on our own. But keep those to a minimum. John?
I agree with everything you said, but I do wonder about Wall Street these days. Punish the bad guys, etc.
Yeah.
Do you have an opinion on Wall Street as business?
I sure do. I got an opinion on most things. Get the microphone here. Yeah, John, I have an opinion on Wall Street. We had conversations about this within Cargill, somewhat facetiously, but there was one of my colleagues on the corporate leadership team who said, those guys on Wall Street, we ought to erect a gallows right out in front of the New York Stock Exchange, where the bull and the bear are there, and hang a few guys, the bad guys. Make an example. A public hanging. They used to do that in merry old England, and sure, it's outlandish, but really, really serious punishment. No fooling, and teach people that we mean business, and you guys have to have ethics as well as the rest of us do. How's that for an opinion? Yes, sir.
What were the differences working at Mosaic as a public company versus Cargill, which is private? Can you comment about those two farms?
I've got some colleagues from Mosaic here that could probably answer the question as well as I can, but dramatically different. We went public at the time Sarbanes-Oxley was being put in place, and we had huge challenges to comply with the rules of Section 404 in particular of Sarbanes-Oxley compared to the way Cargill keeps its books. Now that sounds like Cargill doesn't keep its books very well. Believe me, we do. But this extra load of regulation that you have when you're governed by or regulated by the SEC is just massive. And then investors wanted us to take a short-term view. How can we make the stock go up in a hurry, as opposed to more long-term view that Cargill has had for many, many years? That was quite an adjustment.
What do you think about the concept of the rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer, and the middle class is collapsing? Where do you see that going?
I believe very strongly in growth, in a situation where everybody improves their standard of living, and that's more important than the shift in income distribution, in my view. Because if the person in the bottom 20% is feeling better about his or her standard of living, that's what we want to have happen. In China, that's what they work on. They're working 100% of the time on improving everybody's standard of living, and they're making some very, very wealthy people at the top. But generally speaking, the people who are working on farms are moving more to the city and getting better jobs. They have more consumer. Everybody's got a cell phone, and they didn't in '88 when I was there for the first time. And I think that if you look at the numbers, the demographics of income distribution haven't shifted all that much. When President Obama made his speech, he had a fact wrong in his speech when he said 10% have half the income. It's about 20%, and the top 20%, and that's been the same way for the last 40 or 50 years, within a percentage point or two. So again, check the facts, and I think work on growth for everybody. Linda.
You talked a lot about what you've learned, which is obviously very insightful, and I can't
work hard. There's a lot of advice right in this, Linda. But you know, the hard work, perseverance, persistence. Find the best advice really is find a job or a calling in your life that you really, really like doing. Because you're going to work for 40 years, like I did, and longer. And if you're not happy, it's going to be a pretty crummy 40 years. So find something, and if it takes several iterations to find it, take them. But when you do, you'll enjoy your life and you'll contribute more because you're doing something you're really passionate about. That's the best advice I can give. I've been giving it for a long time, too. Right, Molly? Well, thanks very much. I really appreciate the chance to come back to Blake and to be with you this morning. And I'll be over here for if anyone wants to pursue anything or kick me out. Thank you. Yeah.
Some of you can't see it, but Fritz has a tie on with a chairlift and 2 skiers, and he did tell us, he said, I will show up in January, but if the snow's really good in Fayette, it may not be there. So thank heavens it hasn't snowed there for a few days, so he did. Well, he said it out quickly, but in case he needs to go to Vail and show that he's kind of erudite and all, we do have a Blake tie. I think that we owe all of our speakers a great deal of gratitude, and again, I'm looking forward to having a great lineup for the rest of the year. And Nina Hale has really helped us out. I apologize if I don't know a lot about her topic, except that she recently sold a business and has gotten involved in some really interesting charitable work. So she should have a great topic for us in a month. I hope you'll all join us. I do want to end with one thing, a quote. And boy, oh boy, this shows that even at Blake, people can be inspired and learn what they want to do and go on to do it. From the yearbook in 1960, again, a fellow by the name of Fritz Corrigan wrote down, everyone gets to put in a quote from one of the classics, and this is what he put in his yearbook. I will follow while learning the ways of leadership, then I will lead. Thanks very much.